This video is brought to you by CuriosityStream. Get your first 30 days of streaming completely free using the link curiositystream.com/featurehistory, or wait until the end to hear more. G'day and welcome to another Feature History Australia Day special, where on top of the usual drinking copious amounts of VB and barbecuing snags, we're going to be celebrating the holiday by examining just about the only bit of Australian history anybody knows, the legend of Ned Kelly. The heroic bushranger who rose from his downtrodden, poverty-stricken background to take on the corrupt authorities of Victoria and go down in the history books with his famous last stand. Or, as we may find out across this two-parter, the quirky outlaw who robbed and raided his way through the bush under delusions of some ambitious revolution. Either one it ends up being, we'll just have to find out as we rewind the clock and start the story of Ned before he was a twinkle in his dad's eye. Through the early 19th century, convict transportation to penal colonies in Australia were at their peak. Many English, Welsh, Irish and Scottish convicts would ship off to the New World and supply their labour to its fledgling colonies. John Kelly, or Red as he was better known, was one of these men, being taken from his home in Ireland to the far-off town of Hobart on the 2nd of January 1842. After receiving his freedom, he'd cross the Bass Strait into the area of not quite yet Victoria. With the backdrop of the gold rush, Red would marry Ellen Quinn and, being very Irish, have 8 children, Ned being their second surviving and eldest son. As the gold dried up, the family moved north to Avenel in 1864. It was here Ned was brought up, and the Kelly family began to find itself at odds with authorities as it slipped further into poverty. In 1865, Red would be sentenced to 6 months hard labour at the Kilmore jail on the account of a bit of stolen meat. Red returned home, a weakened alcoholic, and passed away the next year. The loss of Ned's father would change things forever, as the 12-year-old boy was forced to become the man of the house. The family would move closer to the New South Wales border so that the widowed Ellen could be closer to her family, but this would only be the cause of many more issues for them. I'll let my friend Suibhne explain.
The Kelly family would become what are called selectors, a process in which those with limited means could settle Crown lands on the condition of improving it. The recent legislation that allowed this was not without controversy, especially from Australia's squattocracy. In the continent's early history, squatters were those that illegally settled down on Crown land to graze their livestock, and as the colonies became more established and the squatters more wealthy, they clashed with the government over their legal right to use the land. Selectors were given squatters' land, and even though they held no right to it, these squatters were determined to take it back. They used their money and power to drive the selectors away and force them to forfeit their properties. They set themselves up as a political class, called the squattocracy, and with their connections to the police and local governments, would now be bumping heads with the Kelly family, and their 88 acres of selected land in Greta. If you'd like to hear more about the changing dynamics of Australia throughout its history, come over to the Suibhne channel for the history of Australia.
Cheers to Suibhne for that bit, because I know me explaining 19th century Victorian land reform it's not nearly as fun. But as we were, the Kelly family was quickly subject to police persecution, some of it justly, but a lot of it not. To worsen things, aged 14, Ned would fall in with convict turned bushranger Harry Power, becoming his apprentice of sorts. It wasn't long before Ned was on the wrong side of the law. In an altercation with the Chinaman Ah Fu, Ned allegedly proclaimed himself a bushranger. Just like a bushranger, he'd be arrested, but with no evidence he was released. Power would not be so lucky being captured and staying that way. After that, Ned would never go bushranging again. Well, for 7 years at least. That doesn't mean Ned kept his hands clean. In 1870, he got 3 months' labour for assault, and in 1871 was arrested again for feloniously receiving a horse, most likely unknowingly. Ned received a nasty 3 years hard labour for the crime and would only return home in early 1874, a much older and changed man. When Ned was released, he attempted an honest living in timber. In the 2 years Ned pursued this life, his mother would marry an American, George King, and soon Ned fell back into his old ways, joining his stepfather and younger brother Dan Kelly in horse rustling. They ran a neat racket, stealing horses and selling them back to themselves, creating legal bills of sale and leaving the horses untraceable. The group would bring in more members and become known as the Greta Mob, the bane of squatters, to Ned's delight. However, Ned, in September of 1877, would find himself arrested for drunkenness in Benalla. In the morning, he'd flee the police only to be pursued into a store. In the struggle, his trousers would be torn, and Constable Thomas Lonigan would take that as a lovely opportunity to blackball Ned, getting that vice grip on his knackers. Eventually, the fight was broken up, and Ned left with a fine and a few choice words for Lonigan. "I never shot a man yet, but if ever I do, so help me God, you'll be the first." After this event, the police were reinvigorated to bring down Ned, and it'd be Constable Fitzpatrick, a crooked and usually drunk man, that took it upon himself to be the one who did it. No one asked him to. In April 1878, he went to the Kelly residence with an arrest warrant for Dan and told the boy exactly that. In response, he was beaten, shot by Ned, forced to remove the bullet, and had to flee. According to Ned, however, he wasn't there was no warrant, and the wound was self-inflicted. According to others, Ned was there, Fitzpatrick was drunk though, and the wound was not a bullet. Whatever the case was, Fitzpatrick returned to Benalla with his side of the story, and a £100 bounty was put out on Ned. Ned and his gang, Dan, Steve Hart and Joe Byrne, would escape to the bush before officers came knocking on their door. So instead, his mother was arrested for her part in the squabble and sentenced to a ridiculous 3 years hard labour. When this news got back to the Kelly boys, they knew the court had made up their mind already and so refused to let themselves face the jury. The police would have to send search parties in after them. Ned decided they'd be the first to bushwhack the police, and so on October 25th, the gang would confront 2 officers at their camp. Fire was quickly exchanged and Constable Lonigan was shot dead by Ned. He had lived up to his promise. The other, Constable McIntyre, would surrender as they were originally asked, but when 2 officers returned to the camp, a fight broke out again, leaving another officer dead, 1 captured, and allowing McIntyre to escape. The captured Sergeant Kennedy would be killed away from the raided camp, and McIntyre would be able to report the killings back to Benalla. In only a matter of a few hours, the men had gone from horse thieves to cop killers. They were now the outlawed Kelly gang. The reward was raised to £500. The Kellys would shoot on sight, and they were at a point of no return. The Kellys had shocked, but also captivated Australia. They now had the ire of the British Empire, and Ned was going to wage a war on them. Well, not a proper war. The Empire wasn't exactly rallying their soldiers. But if you'd like to hear about wars like that, I recommend checking out the Curiosity Stream series on the War of 1812. Giving it a watch, I'm kinda wishing I'd do the topic. The Curiosity Stream is a captivating subscription streaming service focused on educational documentaries. You know, the kind of thing you probably like. With a library of over 2,000 titles covering history, science, nature, technology, and society, it's bound that, if not my recommendation, something will catch your interest. And at the very least, you can give it a risk-free shot by signing up at curiositystream.com/featurehistory and getting your first 30 days completely free. And with that said, I'd just like to again thank Suibhne. Do actually check out his video, and I'll see you all in the next part. Happy Invasion Day.